maybe about a month ago now, because it was super strong. It came through the winter stronger than any of the other hives. And so I divided it because it was raising natural queen cells. Actually, it had so much brood and bees, I divided it into 2 different hives. And so now I'm going to check to make sure that they're not trying to do it all over again and make queen cells and swarm again. So I need to remove the honey super to get down into the brood hive. And on this one, I have 2 boxes for the brood to be in. And they're probably in the bottom because there's not that many bees that I see in the top brood box here yet. It's always good to give a little smoke in between so don't have a couple bees come charging out to sting. Take a frame out on the end to make room to get the others out without squishing any bees. This frame has some sealed over honey in it and plenty of room to make more. Next frame is this darker sealed over stuff is older honey that they had through all winter that they didn't need to eat during the winter, and so then they just start packing the new honey in around it. Okay, quite a bit of pollen in this next one, and that bee actually has pollen on top of it and on its legs there from gathering it out of the flowers. So they don't always get pollen on their back, but it depends on how powdery the pollen is from whatever source they were collecting the pollen from. But there it is on their legs, and then they'll climb over one of these cells and kind of scrape it off into the cell, and other bees will pack it in by kind of pushing it in with their heads. And the bees usually store the pollen real close to the brood because it's the first food for the baby bees. And so the next frame, good chance we'll have some brood in it, or larvae and eggs. Okay, I see a lot of brood, sealed brood in this one. There we go. And there's a lot of pollen around the edges. And you can't see it on the camera, but the eggs are like little tiny white sticks in the bottom, which I saw some in there, so the queen's laying. Let's see if we can get the light to shine in. Okay, the white, then you can probably see it is larvae that are not sealed over yet because they're not old enough. And also no queen cells on that, so that's nice. Because I'd rather not this queen swarm away and I lose her, because she was had the strongest hive through the winter and the quickest laying of eggs to become a strong hive to make honey. Oh, there she is. Right there. Bees will vary in color. Sometimes they're a little more yellowish. This one is a little bit darker brown. But there she goes. And since probably won't see her laying any eggs since we are disturbing the hive, but sometimes you'll see them. They'll put their bottom end right down in a cell and lay eggs. And then the nurse bees, which are the ones that are all over the brood, will take care of them. So when a bee hatches out, when the brood hatches out, we should look for a hatching one too. So their first job after they hatch out is to be a nurse bee. So they stay in the hive and they take care of the brood. That's going to be the next bees.
So kind of like a babysitter.
Because they take care of the babies.
Mm-hmm.
There's the queen again. I want to make sure she gets on the hive and on the frame in a good place before I put it back in, because I don't want to squish her. Okay, she's on the side now enough where I can carefully put it back in. And so then when they get older, they become field bees, which they fly out and gather nectar or pollen, depending on the needs of the hive. Whether they're a honey gatherer or a pollen gatherer. That's a piece of pollen that fell out of the frame, and that bee's trying to pick it back up. This is a nice gentle hive too, which is always good, because bee temperament can vary. Sometimes you get to a hive that's just mean, and you don't want to keep hives like that, because one, you don't want to have all the trouble when you're working them, and two, you don't want them breeding and making new hives that are going to be mean bees. These are queen cells here, which they often normally build them, but these have no eggs or anything in them, so they're not attempting to build queen cells to swarm yet. But I'll remove them just so they takes longer before they do such a thing.
So is the reason that some of these bees look like they have shorter wings is because they're young?
That may be.
That one has a lot of pollen.
Once a bee starts gathering, goes out as a field bee to gather nectar or pollen, then they do that until they wear out and die. And so
they never retire.
And bees, when the bee does die, it doesn't usually die in the hive. See these bees all together right here with their heads together? Not sure what they're doing, but bees do communicate together like that. There's a bee with pollen. Here's another one that's got pollen on its back. The way the queen excluder works, and I'll show you on one over here that's not on a hive yet, is that the metal wires are just far enough apart that a worker bee can come up through them, but the queen, who's a little bit larger, cannot fit through there. So when she's down here in a brood box, she can't come up, but the workers can. So they can come up and put honey up above. And the queen is kept down below so that all the brood will be down in the brood boxes and that they won't have brood scattered through the honey super. This was the hive that I made a divide from the one with the really good queen. And then I set in the spot that one used to be in so that all the field bees would come in this one and make it a stronger divide. So it has a couple supers on it for honey. And supers can be either a smaller one, which we call a shallow, or they can be a deep hive just like a brood box is. This one has a plastic queen excluder instead of metal, but it's the same thing. The space between is big enough for workers to come through, but too small for a queen to come in. Okay, quite a bit of honey and some pollen in that frame. Same with this one. So this divide was with queen cells, so it would of course have a virgin queen, which would take time to go out and mate before she could start laying. And hopefully it was all successful. These long things, they were queen cells. And then this one has an open end where a bee hatched from it. These that are eaten out from the side, once they had a hatched queen, they destroyed these because they didn't want more queens and swarms going out. And if two queens meet in a hive, they'll fight each other till there's only one. And queens have stingers too. So I'll remove those. And so far I'm not seeing any eggs and brood, so these frames that have the old queen cells on them were full of brood when I made the divide, and it's all hatched out. That's why they're all look pretty empty now. Another hatch cell. And I'm not seeing any eggs or larvae in those. Since that hive didn't requeen successfully, I'm going to check the other divide I made from the strong hive earlier to see if it's got a laying queen yet. First frame has honey and pollen in it. Okay, so we have some brood and some larvae and eggs in this one. The white down in the cells is larvae, and on the outside of them is some little eggs. So this one was successful in requeening. And so the first divide that doesn't have a queen laying, I'm going to give it a couple frames of brood with eggs and larvae out of another hive so that it can go through the process of raising a queen all over again. So this is the hive that did not successfully raise the queen again. And the hive right beside it is a strong hive, so I'm going to go through it to get some frames with brood and eggs so that they can raise a queen all over again. And this time, hopefully, she will succeed in mating and not being eaten by a bird or something, and getting back to the hive and laying eggs. Here we have brood in this one, but I'm not seeing larvae or eggs, so we'll want to, there's a hatched queen cell. Which may mean that this one swarmed, even though I did divide it to try to prevent swarming. And so we'll see if we find larvae. This is a hatched queen cell. Happens to have a worker bee in it who's just cleaning out things. There it goes. And this one beside it, and one here I'm checking, because it may just be in the process of having queens hatch out. And if so, if those queen cells are good, here's a hatched one with the little cap still on that a queen just recently hatched out of. And a couple more closed cells. So I'm going to look over this one real good to make sure I don't see a queen on it. And then I'll give it to that one because it has queens just ready to hatch out, and so that'll save a lot of time, and they won't have to start from an egg to build queen cells to make a new queen. Because we caught this one right in the process of having the queens hatch out and before it swarmed. Okay, not seeing any queens, so I'll give it this frame to the other hive. The bees that are on it are nurse bees because they're taking care of brood. And so even though the scent is different, nurse bees and brood is accepted in a when you introduce it to another hive, and they don't really fight like the field bees might fight each other if you just mix them together from a couple different hives. I'm going to look in this one a little bit more. Okay, so I've checked the rest of the frames in this hive, and even though there's still brood, there's no new larvae or eggs, meaning the old queen swarmed. It may be a swarm that I caught just 2 days ago, since it still has hatching queen cells. And so this frame with a lot of brood, I'm going to go ahead and put in that hive also, even though it doesn't have any more queen cells, because I already put one in with queen cells. But these bees hatching will give this hive more bees. As bees die off that are out gathering nectar, that it won't just dwindle down to be too weak. And since the cells I put in are just about to hatch, that'll shorten the time when it can requeen. It's always good to give another one look over, because with all those hatch cells we saw, there could be virgin queens running around in here. Okay, I don't see any, but this is a drone bee. This is the male bee. They do not have a stinger. They're bigger and fatter. They also can't fit through an excluder. See, I don't have to worry about picking him up or holding him. He can't sting. So the virgin queens will go out, and in the air they'll mate with drones. And then after a couple days of mating flights, and for the rest of their life, they just stay in the hive and lay eggs.
And what do the drones do?
Drones are just kind of extra baggage. They eat honey. They don't do any work other than at the one time they may mate. And in fact, when bees are getting ready for winter and they're not going to be working, they'll kick all the drones out of the hive. Okay, so these frames will need to go back in this hive now, since I put a couple from it into the other hive.
And does that one have queen cells?
This one had hatched queen cells, so there's probably some virgin queens in there to requeen it. And then the one that was queenless now, queen cells just ready to hatch, and this one should have virgin queens. And even though we didn't see them, that's not uncommon. They're kind of hard to spot, the queens often.